My name's Bill Stockman. I'm the electric utility director for the city of Lexington. Well, one of the first things we do is we just start tracking the storm if we're talking like, for example, a hurricane, because those we usually get the most advanced notice, and we start looking for the path that it's taking and trying to determine, is it going to impact us or not? Once we're pretty sure it's going to impact us, then we start making preparations. And those preparations start by letting the crews know that, hey, a storm is headed this way. We're probably going to put everyone on call. Depending on the track of the storm and the time, we get with our contractors. We let our contractors know that we're going to be putting them on call and giving them a rough idea of when we think it's going to impact us so that they kind of know what's happening. So we have tree crews and we have electrical contractors that actually work for the city also. And so it actually is a force multiplier for us. So instead of our 4 or 5 crews that we can fill, we can actually put about 10 to 12 crews out in the system, plus tree crews, and we pair those up. So we get everyone on notice that we're going to need them. And then depending on the severity, whether we use them or not. But then some other things that we start doing is we start considering filling our emergency fuel tank for diesel. We start talking to restaurants about supplying meals for us, for our crews, because, we'll be working them 16 hours a day. Again, and that just depends on how long the storm lasts. It might be, if we get lucky and it goes in and out, and we might just work 24 hours and we're done and we'll get everyone back on. But if it's really severe, then we could be doing it for weeks, where that we're literally working 16 hours a day and 8 hours off. And so we're having to feed our people. We're having to provide lodging for our contractors that live too far away to travel back and forth. So we make a lot of those arrangements. Then we also work with our other utility departments to get them to prep for helping us, like removing debris out of the streets so we can get to downed wires, preparing their chainsaws and equipment. And so we just kind of go through a whole litany of things just to prepare for the storm. They need to follow the weather too, to know what the storm's going to do and how severe it's going to affect us or not. But more importantly, they also need to make sure that they have supply of medicine for anything that they may need, because if it is an extended outage, an extended storm where it does a lot of damage, there's places in the city that could be out for weeks, theoretically. Just depends on how bad we get hit. And with that, you need to have water and you need to have food. You need to have a plan where if it doesn't get restored in a certain amount of time, is there some other place you could go to have power? Those are the main things. And you could reference, the Hurricane Center, and they give you a lot of, how to protect your home kind of things and all that. We're fortunate in some ways because we're far enough inland. Most of the time, the storms that are going to impact us are not going to be like they would if they're coming through Florida, where they're a Category 5. So, the damage to your home starts to become less. It's really more trees that cause the problems, and then they tear down the wires, and we just have to get to all of that. So what we do is we have rules in place, about how much of wind that our buckets can stand, because the manufacturer limits it to 35 miles an hour. So as long as the wind is not in excess of the manufacturer's rating for that equipment, then yes, we continue to work in the storm, we continue to restore. If the crew deems it to be unsafe at their location at that time, we absolutely tell them, to get out of it and wait it out. Because, with hurricanes, for example, there is bands of wind that pass through. So the wind might get to 45, 50 miles an hour gust. But once that band passes through until the next one starts, there's a window that they can do some restoration, and they do restoration during that time. So it just depends on the severity of the storm. But yes, we do work during the storm. And when we start getting outages, we start responding to outages. Well, so what we typically try to do is we look at critical customers, meaning fire, police, hospitals, water, the water plant. And we want to try to make sure, if we can, that all of those things are up and running first, because those help our citizens and allow our police and fire to respond. And so they need power and they need radio communication to do that. So we make them a priority. Then after that, we start looking, if this is a protracted storm, we start looking at the commercial district, trying to make sure people can get gas, people can get food, ice, those kind of things. So we try to restore that. Now, and during that whole time, it's not like we only have one crew doing this. We have, maybe 10 or 20 crews, depending on the severity. And so then we also start looking at the largest number of customers out in an area. So if we have 2,000 customers out and we can pick up one piece of line and it restores 2,000 customers, then we would do that compared to having 500 customers out and picking up that one piece of line. So we try to get the most customers we can back in the quickest. And we just keep working down the list and then ultimately get to the single outage customers that only one customer is impacted. And we just work through that process. As the storm rolls through, if you have a branch in your yard that breaks off and tears down your service to just your house, we only have a one customer outage. And so that goes at the bottom of our list compared to if we have a tree fall over and it takes 20 customers out on the primary, we would restore that 20 customers first, because in the same amount of time we can restore the one customer, we can get 20 back on. So we try to be as efficient as we can as getting the largest number of customers back in service as quickly as possible. And it does take substantially longer to visit all the single outages, because we could easily have 150 or 200 single outages out there. And each one of those we have to send a crew to, compared to if we got 1,000 customers out and we send that same crew and they spend 2 hours and they get 1,000 customers back on. We can spend that same 2 hours trying to get one customer back on. And so at the tail end of the storm, we're always doing that cleanup. And then there's also the other piece to that. If it's damaged the customer's home, meaning it's ripped down their service on their attached to their wall or their meter can, those have to be repaired before we can put the service back up. So there's cleanup that goes in with that also. Over the past 6 years or so, we have really invested heavily in installing reclosures. We've invested heavily in installing cutouts and doing substantial tree trimming, where we're actually trimming back to the full length and width of our right-of-ways. And what all these things do, for example, a reclosure is just a sectionalizing device that looks at a piece of line. So as opposed to, let's just say we have 2,000 customers on a circuit. Well, if there's a tree that falls down beyond the reclosure, that reclosure is set up to where it will open, and maybe it only affects 500 of the 2,000 customers because it opens up, it leaves all the rest of the customers behind it on. And it's the same way with our cutouts that we've installed. We started installing cutouts throughout our entire system. And what that does is, if there's one little tap that has 5 customers on it and a branch or something falls across that cutout will blow. It will isolate those 5 customers, but it'll keep the 2,000 customers on. And then we even take that down to the more granular level. We put it on top of transformers also now too, which we didn't do. And so by doing that, if the transformer decides to die because of a stroke of lightning in that area, and maybe it only feeds one customer, maybe it feeds 2, but the cutout will blow, it won't take out the whole tap line, which would save maybe 100 customers being in. So we've tried to layer our protection to have the most amount of customers maintain service as possible. And then in addition to that, we spend over $1 million a year on tree trimming, and that is to keep the trees away from our lines. So most of our tree issues that we have in these storms, it's not from a branch falling and taking out our lines, it's usually from massive trees that are 100-foot tall. The ground is wet, the wind pushes them over, and they're nowhere near our lines, but they fall into our lines and break our poles or tear down a customer service. So it's usually not a tree trimming issue, it's more of a tree uprooting issue that we have to deal with. And so, but those things have made huge impacts in our reliability on an annual trim cycle. And so what we attempt to do, our goal is we want to trim our circuits every 4.5 to 5 years. On our regular distribution, we have a 15-foot right away from center of pole to one side and 15 other side. And so on those, we only trim back that 15 foot because that's legally what we can take. On our transmission lines, we have a 30 foot. And so we trim back that 30 foot, and that is basically from more or less the ground all the way up to as high as we can reach, which is like 70 foot with our buckets. We try to be proactive instead of reactive. We have invested a lot of time and resources in improving our outage management system. We use data voice. And what that allows us to do is, as a customer calling in, it allows you to call into our IVR system and report your outage. It allows you to text into it and report your outage. It allows you to actually call our customer service people and report an outage. And then once that outage is reported, it actually shows up on a map, and then it shows their crews. So we have an outage map on our website, and you can actually go there and see, do we know about that outage? Is it showing up in the system? Has it been dispatched yet? The estimated time for repairs, all of that stuff is available to the customer to be able to see that. The other thing that we do is when someone has reported an outage that's already been reported, the system lets you know that we've already got that outage, and the other thing that our system does is when we restore service, if you have your number with us, then our system will call you back and notify you that we believe your power has been restored. If it hasn't been restored, please call this number. And the reason we do that piece of it is because in a very large storm, sometimes we take care of the big outage, but while the power is out, something else falls or breaks behind the big outage that we have no visibility to because all these customers have been out. So we turn the power back on, and then a handful of customers are still out. So that's where when we call you back, our system calls you back, autonomously, then it gives you the opportunity to say, oh, my power's still not out. I need to call back in and let them know, and then you'll get back in the system and we'll create a ticket for that. Then on our side of that, what the data voice system does, it allows us to send our crews based on geographic area and numbers. So I can know that I have 1,000 customers out here, or I have 5 out here. I can see on a map where my crews are located so that I can make a decision on, I don't send them from the south end of the county to the north end of the county if I've got something close to them. And so we try to leverage that and keep crews in certain areas as opposed to spending a lot of time traveling. We try to cluster their work so that we get more work time out of the same amount of hours. And we leverage that system. The other thing we do is we can remotely assign those tickets to our crews. So the old way, before we really invested all the resources to have data voice up and running and functioning correctly, they would have to come in and pick up tickets and have to come in and we would clear tickets. Now that is all done by tablet. We can dispatch them that, they can clear it, they can put the cause of it, and it just makes us much more efficient. So we've leveraged technology greatly in that area. Also, our data voice system is predictive. So based on the people that call into the data voice system and report their outage, it starts making a prediction of where the trouble is, which helps us try to isolate it and find it faster, again, which leads to quicker restoration times. So in our system, we default to telling people a 4-hour estimated restoration time for a non-major storm event. So if just a routine outage happens, it's going to tell you 4 hours. When our crew gets there, what they will do is if it's going to take 8 hours, they will adjust that time up to say that they believe it's going to take 8 hours because now they've seen what's going on. They have a better idea. We used to have it at 2, but what we found is a lot of our average outages sometimes exceeded that. And so we felt it's better to tell you a little bit longer than tell you too short a time. And then once the crew gets there, they make a decision and they can adjust the time. When it comes to a hurricane, we actually stop predicting the outage restoration time because the truth be told is we really don't know, because as these bands roll through, what we've seen in other storms that we've handled in 18 and 19 when they came through our area, we'd pick everything up and have a lot of everything working, and then another band would come through and we'd have another 2,000 outages. And that will continue for sometimes days. One thing that to please remember, with these storms, if you find down wires across your car, across your home, across your property, do not take and try to pick them up because they could be energized. Just because they're down does not mean they're not on. And a lot of people, emergency rescue people, get killed that way. Homeowners get killed that way. So, call in, report the down wires, let us come and take care of it. Because that's probably the biggest hazard during these storms, is that things come down that we don't know about, and the power gets restored and you think it's still off, and someone picks it up and they get hurt or injured, and we don't want that to happen.